welcome to Researcher Revealed. I'm Dr. Rosalind Austin, host of this podcast, where we go behind just the name at the end of the title on a research paper to get to know who wrote it and why they are researching. On today's episode, we have our first American guest. Kelly is a nurse researcher. Sorry. Nurse scientist. And if you want to find out why she calls herself a scientist over a researcher, you'll need to listen to the full episode. Thanks for joining. Enjoy. I'm Dr. Rosalind Austin and host of Researcher Revealed. Welcome to this week's podcast. It's been 3 weeks since the last one. Hope you really enjoyed it. On today's episode, we have the very first ever American guest. Please welcome Lynn. No, Lynn. I saw your name on the screen. I knew that was going to happen.
That's great. Yay.
That's great. Kelly. Can you introduce yourself to people while I get myself composed?
Absolutely. My name is Kelly Wierenga. I'm an associate professor at the Indiana University School of Nursing. I have been there for about 6 years now and have been working with women who have cardiac events and helping them with their recovery.
Okay. So, nurse by background. Working at a university, doing research, or do you teach as well?
I do both.
You do both. Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. I cannot wait to dive into how you got into this career and learn more about the research that you're doing. But we need to do the Rapid 11.
Yay.
Dun, dun, dun. So, are you ready?
I am.
Right. Windows or Mac?
Mac.
Mac. Ooh, you're a rare bird. No, seriously, not very many health researchers so far are Mac users.
Yeah, I do have a Windows machine that goes mostly unused. I have one piece of software that I have to use it for, but otherwise I just give it dirty looks.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
I'd be the same if I had a Mac. Tea or coffee?
Both.
Ooh, nice. I need to hear more.
Coffee for morning time.
Okay.
Tea for afternoon and evening.
Nice.
Both,
it.
Both with nothing in it. Just coffee, just tea.
And tea being like ordinary tea or like herbal infusions?
I like herbal teas.
Okay.
And my son, who has autism, really loves to make mixes of tea. So I have all the raw ingredients, and then he sort of like decides what I'm gonna have.
Wow.
I know.
Oh, that sounds exciting.
Sometimes it's very exciting, like unpalatable, but you still smile and drink it.
The sacrifices you make as a parent, I guess.
I know, he's adorable, so.
Oh, sounds cool. Sounds very good. Right. So when you're writing, do you have music, sounds, or silence?
Silence.
Silence. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Mm-hmm. Where do you tend to work? Home or an office?
Home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. What time of day are you most productive? Not like the hour, but like generically.
Late morning.
Late morning. Okay. Nice. Nice.
I have to wake up a little bit first. I have to do email or something.
I admire the people who are early risers who like have their day pretty much done by the time my brain actually gets in.
Well, I don't know if you've noticed, but I have a couch in my home office.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's just not time yet, and I just have to go back there for a little bit.
That is a good investment. I might have to get one of those in here. I never thought of doing that. I'm not sure if I had a couch, I'd never get anything done.
Yeah, that's true. It has to there's boundaries. There's limits.
Fair enough.
It's a timer.
Fair enough. Favorite referencing management system software?
Oh, does anybody have a favorite? They're all terrible. They're all terrible. I'll tell you what. My favorite is Jenny. She's my
Jenny.
she's she's a student
I
I've
was
worked
like,
with
I've not heard
forever.
of that software before. What's Jenny?
No, she's just a human and she's amazing.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, that sounds amazing. I'd love to have a Jenny.
I know,
Can we
right?
clone her?
I don't know, but she is amazing. If she ever hears this, she's gonna blush, I think. But yeah, she is fantastic. She's gonna be an amazing nurse scientist. But right
Nice,
now, sometimes she helps me with my referencing software.
nice. I think we all need like emotional support people when it comes to dealing with the software we have to use. Right. What about favorite data visualization tool?
Well, if I am feeling adventurous, I use R.
Mm. Can you actually use R?
With an emotional support friend, yes.
Wow, that's so cool. That's like gold. I've got the books that tell you how to do it, but I've not yet given myself the time to give it a
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, no, you have to have a Scott for that.
Okay.
So you'll need a Jenny and a Scott.
I was just say, I'm gonna have it's like a list of people that I need to magically find in my life.
I mean, I think I have like 25 colleagues who really, sometimes I wonder if I'm actually doing any work because I'm just asking people for help all the time.
But I think that's such an important part of being a researcher. Like, one of the things, and we'll get into your journey more, but from like one of the things I really wonder about with like your training as a nurse researcher, nurse scientist, PhD, health person, is it's so focused on when you're doing the training, it's so focused on you. But then in reality, when you start converting in postdoc world, it's still you, but you have to start branching out more to build a network so that that responsibility isn't all yours. And you need a team of Jennies and Scotts and whoever else in order to make really good research happen because one person can't do it all.
Yes,
So we'll talk about
absolutely.
that later. We'll put that on a shelf. But
Okay.
I'm in that zone of postdoc world trying to convert from only me to having a gang and trying to figure out how to build a gang. So we'll dive into that later.
All right.
Next question. Desk snack. Do you eat at your desk? And if so, what do you tend to eat?
I do eat at my desk.
All right. So favorite snack.
Gummy bears.
Ooh.
I have to put them in
Nice.
a little bowl, otherwise, I just eat them all.
Again with the boundaries. I like it. It's
I know,
important.
because absent-minded writers just, can consume mad calories.
Yep.
Mm.
I can definitely attest to that one. There may or may not have been a lot of days in my PhD where I ate an unusual amount of chocolate.
Yes. And you're like, who ate all of that? Oh,
And then
it's
I
me.
realized I was the only one in my house. I was like, well,
Nobody else to blame.
I know, it's really terrible. Right. When planning or organizing, are you a digital or pen and paper person?
Pen and paper.
Nice.
Yeah.
Love it. Very good. What book are you currently reading?
How to Kill Your Family. I'm almost done.
Okay. Is this like an instruction book?
It is not. And I actually bought it in Sweden when I was visiting. And I only
It's
picked
not
it
an
up because
instruction book. So is it fiction?
yes.
Okay.
I only picked it up because of the title. And then I was like curious and I was like, oh, I bought that. Maybe I should read it. So yeah, I'm almost done and it's pretty amusing. And I just like carrying it around because it looks like maybe I have a manual.
That's brilliant. You gotta, I love funny book titles like that. That like you take in public places purposely just to get people's
Yes.
looks. Love
People
it.
are like, I need to move away from you because I'm not sure if you're going to kill your family, where does it end?
Exactly. It's a surefire way to make sure you have an empty seat in public transport.
That's right.
I might have to buy that book with the amount of travel I'm doing. Right, last question. Researcher who you admire.
Ooh, well, I have many great mentors that I've had.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think that that is a big part of my list. So Shirley Moore
Yeah.
was my postdoc mentor. Um, Barb Given was in my pre-doc. Rebecca Lado was in my pre-doc. And Susan Pressler helped me get started at Indiana University. So I think it's hard not to just really appreciate the people who've poured into you.
Yeah, definitely. It's um so I can't keep when I came up with the podcast, I was like, I need to ask some questions just to sort of get the juices flowing, get people to calm down, yada yada. But I thought really long and hard about which questions to ask. And the majority of them I'm asking for selfish reasons. Shh, don't tell anybody. Top secret. No, because it's like I want top tips on like software to use, on like time management, productivity, things like that. And I
Mhm.
figured if I need to know those things, surely other researchers out there are thinking the same thing. So
Absolutely. We're all like, is there a referencing software that's not evil? No,
exactly.
no,
The
there's
amount of
not.
people when I ask that question were like, no, I don't have a favorite, but I have to use this one. It's awesome.
Yeah, so one of my mentors, until
Yeah.
she retired, she still did it by hand because she hated
Yeah.
all the software so much.
The best. So hand is still quite common.
Yeah.
The other one that really surprised me that I've started using, especially like so if you're like contributing to a paper and it's not like necessarily fits in with your library, your existing like EndNote library or whatever, Google. Google
Oh,
Scholar.
I didn't
Yeah.
know that you could do that.
Quick and
We,
easy. So if you search in Google Scholar, one of my previous guests taught me this. Find an article, fill in the blank, and at the bottom of the article it has a cite button. Press that, job done. It'll download the citation, and then you can put it into whichever referencing management system you want to use, and you're done.
that's
You don't
brilliant.
have to search for the PDF and blah blah blah.
So we usually, in my team, we just use track changes. We just put all of the references like in track changes so that at the end we just put them all in.
Yeah, I've started doing that too because there's too many like when you're using the referencing management system, like if somebody touches them,
Yes.
EndNote
Destroyed.
has a hissy fit.
Yeah.
And then you have to start all over again. So I've started doing the comments as well when I'm collaborating and tell people don't touch it. Don't
Yes.
touch
Don't
it.
worry about it. Just leave it there. Do it later.
If
That's
you see like punctuation or spelling that's wrong, put it as a comment. Don't touch it. Anyways, right. So thank you very much for the research 11, the rapid 11, even.
Mhm.
So scroll back to your introduction. You're a nurse and you've ended up as you're using the term nurse scientist over nurse researcher. And I'm going to
Yes.
ask a question about that later. So we're going to put a pin in that one as well. But how did you go from being a nurse to
Mhm.
becoming a nurse scientist?
Okay. Well, I was a practicing nurse for 10 years.
Hmm.
And I worked in a large health system where like you start working somewhere, but then the place that you're working at has changed,
Okay.
right? So like one day we were neuro, and then we were neuro and cardiac.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I became a nurse educator and really enjoyed that. I was invited to put together a nurse extern program. So it was like
Okay.
students between their third and fourth year in undergraduate, and giving them an opportunity to sort of like move about the hospital
Okay.
to see what kind of things they actually like doing.
Nice.
Yeah, it was fun. But then that stemmed into like a more permanent position teaching in the hospital.
Okay. And so
So
the teaching then connected you to university.
yes, and so then I felt like most of us at many times in our career, underprepared and have no idea what we're doing. And so I was like, well, I should go back to school. So I went back to school to get my master's in nursing education. Um, really enjoyed that. But while I was doing that, the hospital had asked me and my BFF, best friend forever, Jackie, to do a research project with the staff nurses. And
Okay.
we're like, okay, but we don't know what we're doing, right? And they were like, yeah, it's fine. They have like one nurse researcher who sort of like guides the projects, and they're pretty simple projects.
Okay.
Um, it's like descriptive sort of work.
Okay.
And so we did that. And while we did that, we each had babies. So we had to keep taking time away to, have children. Took us a really long time to finish, but I fell in love with research in the
Ah.
midst of all that. So then I decided, hey, why not go back to school some more? And went to get my PhD. Um, I really enjoyed that too. And I think that's what really set me on, like, am I going to focus on teaching or research? And the answer was research. I do enjoy teaching as well still. So that's kind of where I started from. But the research has got me.
So doing a PhD in the US of A in the state of India, because I'm connected enough to North America, being Canadian, that I know that state to state the rules can be
Very different.
vastly different. So in Indiana, to do your PhD, is that funded? Is it unfunded? Did you do it part-time, full-time? Did you still continue working as a teacher and ward nurse? Tell us a little bit about how that worked for you.
Sure. Well, I was in Michigan at the time.
Okay.
That's where I grew up. It's okay. I've moved around a bit. So I was in Michigan, and none of my degrees were funded. So I personally financed everyone, which means I just have a lot of student loans still. Luckily,
That's
my
very
husband,
common in America.
yeah, it is. It's
Not
terrible.
unusual. It's terrible.
My husband makes more than I do with far less education. Good for him. So he gets to pay for my student loans.
Oh, lucky him.
I know. I came with some great benefits.
Thank you so much.
I know. That's when
Um,
you know somebody loves you, when they'll take on thousands and thousands of dollars of debt.
Well, so one of the reasons why I wanted you to talk a little bit about that is I think, so grew up in Canada. Similarly, in Canada, if you want education, it's up to you.
Mm,
And when I first came to the UK and I started to learn that like in the news and stuff, like everybody was all up in arms because they were having to pay £9,000, which isn't a non-substantial amount of money, for a 4-year bachelor degree.
what?
I was like, guys, calm down. Just calm down. But put a pin in that because now having been here as long, like I have friends who are going to their PhD about to finish, who even though they tried everything they could, partly because of the profession, partly because it's in health, they had to self-fund as well. And I'm like their biggest advocate of being like, look, even if you can only get somebody to give you like £5, get some funding under your belt because it's such an important skill to have.
Yeah.
And it also, is kind of important for the rest of your life as well. And like the people in America like yourself and in Canada and other places where education isn't as subsidized as it is in other places of the world, I think you all deserve an extra, like, I don't know, star by your name or something.
Let's give us some more letters.
Sure. Like
I know,
an FF. FF doesn't mean anything. No, an SF.
self-funded.
SF, self-funded.
Yeah. Somebody once asked me about that, and they're like, how did you get funding for this? I was like, I asked my husband if I could have some money to do research.
Did you have to declare that in a publication? Because that would be awesome.
I did not, but
Oh man,
it
that's
would
a
have been
missed
brilliant.
opportunity.
I know. I feel like I need to write a letter to the editor and let
Yeah, you
them know
should.
that it was funded by my husband.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that. Oh, that's fabulous. Right. So self-funded, and I'm guessing because it was self-funded, you then did it full time, or were you still working plus going to school full time?
When I did my master's, I did that part-time. So that
Okay.
took 3 years instead of two. And then my PhD, I was full-time, but I also taught for the university for like an
Okay.
exchange of
Yeah.
credits. So,
Yeah.
um, oh, side bit that has nothing to do with anything really. When I was teaching undergrads while in my PhD program, I had like a clinical group and we were in the hospital. And my husband worked in the same hospital, but I didn't want them to think they could get like preferential treatment by my husband. And we didn't have the same last name. And so I
Okay.
just called him Dr. Burrito because he really liked frozen burritos. And so that's what all my students knew him as, is Dr.
Oh,
Burrito.
that's brilliant. I'm sure he loved that.
I didn't tell him for years. And I was like, remember when you used to eat frozen burritos and I hated them? I called you Dr. Burrito.
Oh, that's brilliant. Right. Okay, so that explains that. So the question I put a pin in, I want to take that off the shelf now. Why do you describe yourself as a nurse scientist rather than a nurse researcher?
Uh, I think it's because science is a bit broader of a term than researcher,
Okay.
because there are things that I do that don't seem as aligned with what people usually think of research, right? So,
Okay, explain.
like, I do a lot of work with theory.
Okay.
I really like research and theory. And so, like, a lot of times that isn't looked at as research, even though it kind of it definitely is. But it's not like going out and collecting data and plugging it into your favorite software, which software. Um, and so like it's just different, and so
Okay.
I just see myself as more than just doing research.
Okay, I like that. I was just curious because having read a little bit of your research and not throwing stones at anybody, um, but some of the research you've done, it stands out from your, let's say, stereotypical nurse research paper.
Okay.
Okay. And that's not to degrade what other people do or to say you're better. It just, they're different. So I wondered if it had to do with that rather than your use of theory. So it's really interesting that for you, it's all about your use of theory rather than like the data sets or the fact you do as many RCTs as you do or anything like that. So thank you. That's very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Top 10, do you have, again, selfishly, we've already determined that the questions are all about me, so might as well just keep going. Um, do you have any top tips for getting theoretical papers? Just asking for a friend.
Oh yeah, of
Getting
course.
theoretical papers published because it's like you said, they're research, but they're not considered research. And I have a paper that, I mean, I don't even want to tell you how many times it's been rejected. That people like the only category I can put it in is research because it's research. It's not a review. It's not a, and it keeps getting rejected because they're like, it's not research. And I'm like, well, it is. Anyway.
Uh, yeah, so I have successfully had theory papers published, and I actually have another faculty member that I'm working with who is like days away from submitting a theory paper. I've had the best luck with those papers focusing on nursing specific journals. I
Okay.
think nursing has a better respect for theory and how it can help improve science. And so they seem to really understand the benefits of that and are much more willing to publish.
Okay. As a research?
Yeah,
Mm, okay.
I
Okay.
know.
Well,
I could
fingers
give you
crossed, 'cause
specific I could
I
give you
just
specific journals, but I feel like that's sort of
it's
like
biased. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
plugging like
No, no,
a
no, no, no.
medication.
It was more like whether or not like you'd had like any sort of like top tips of like, oh, look for a journal that has like this kind of article, like, that kind of thing. More so than specific journal names. I've just resubmitted it for like the what feels like 400 millionth time. It's not really that many, but it is a nursing specific journal, so fingers crossed.
Hopefully.
Um, okay, cool. So the next question I want to start to dive into, because we kind of talked about your journey, how you got there, what it was like for you. Start talking about your research. And you mentioned in your introduction a couple of things that made me go, yay! Um, and that is that you're focused on women,
Yay, we're sick.
cardiovascular health,
Mhm.
um, and the emotional impact of that. So take us on that journey. How did you go from being a neuro ward nurse that was forced to start to do cardio? Probably, if you were like me, regrettably, like I was like, no, I don't like cardio, and here I am, a cardio
Yep.
researcher anyway, to an educator, to doing your education, to then doing your PhD, to being fully in the university and dedicating your life to research.
Yeah.
How in that journey did you end up specializing in women's cardiovascular health and emotions?
Yes. So we'll start with I don't know where I want to start. We'll start with cardiac, I suppose.
Okay.
So, like I said, I was a ward nurse and worked with people who were pretty sick, and became really frustrated that they just kept coming back. Right? I was
Mm.
like, "What is wrong with you? We already told you to stop eating at McDonald's." And I was pretty naive back then. I was young, and I thought it was just about the fact that they didn't want to follow the directions that we'd given
Yep.
them. Right. Uh, and then I started to see that the world was bigger than my naive mind had cast people as,
Mm.
and that there was more behind the decisions than just, I gave them a list and they did not follow it. Um, I started to think, like what would it feel like, right, to have a heart attack or, any of these other major cardiac events. And it dawned on me that they either died or they almost died, right?
Mhm.
I was like, oh, that's a big deal. Pretty traumatic and
Yeah.
not an easy thing to just 3 days later
Yeah.
follow a list of instructions.
Yeah.
Uh, and it was actually in men that I noticed it most,
Okay.
but that's because that's just who is in front of me, right? Like women
Okay.
seek
Yeah.
healthcare less often than men, and
Yeah.
we know all these things. And so I got really interested in, what was behind the cardiac events and that they kept coming back. And that's when it dawned on me, they almost died. And that has a huge emotional component to
Yeah.
it. And then you look around and you're like, some of these people are kind of like prepared to deal with the emotional implications, right? Like somebody
Okay.
in their life helped them to understand how to regulate their emotions. And then there's others who that's not the case. And I'm included in that group, right? I think we all study things that we want to get better at. So I would like to be able to regulate my emotions better. So I was like, let's study it.
Okay.
Uh,
So put a pin there for a second. What do you mean by regulate emotions?
Sure. So every day there's things in our lives Some are little tiny things. Some are big things. Your brain has to perceive it, right?
Yep.
It has to be like, oh, my dog is barking and that's annoying. And then you have to put like some sort of value on it, right? Like I just did, like that's
Okay.
annoying.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Okay.
if you don't, like if it doesn't bother you that much, like what do you, like it doesn't matter. You're not going to do anything
Yeah.
with that. But when you get some sort of emotional reaction to that, it affects your life, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels really good and sometimes it feels really bad. Sometimes it just feels interesting and you get
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah.
But any way you go about it, there's something that you're feeling there.
Yeah.
And so regulating that, sometimes you'll want to like we call upregulate, right? Like
Yeah.
say you're at a wedding and you're supposed to be super joyful and you're just like disinterested, right? I don't know why.
Yeah.
You're somewhere else. But
Yeah.
the appropriate thing to do when the bride comes in is to look happy and stand up, right? So you might be like, all right, we got to pump up the joy.
Okay, I see what you that's what I thought you were meaning,
Yeah.
but I've learned to just double check what people mean rather than just assume it. Okay, so you notice that some people, to go back to your story,
Yeah.
you noticed that some people had help and support in learning how to regulate their emotions around that life-altering cardiac event, and others didn't. That's where you were
Right.
at before I interrupted you.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, so I noticed that some people were better apt to deal with what was going on around them. And not all of it, but some of it is just managing your emotional reactions to things. Because if you're really stuck in especially an upset sort of situation, it's really hard to like shift and do other things.
Yep.
Um, my people around me, I won't name names, my husband, sometimes says that he's multitasking. I'm like, no, you're not. There's no such thing. It's switch tasking. It's actually very tiring for your brain to do that.
Yep.
So maybe just focus on one thing. But that's what happens when people are upset, right? Like you get to a place where you're really upset and you're like, let me just put that aside, like bottle it up,
Yeah.
and I will get to it later. But you don't. Like people just don't get to it later, right? They just and that bottle's gonna explode. So
Well, but also, who wants to, like, if that bottle is full of scary, sad, horrible things,
right.
you're not going to want to open it again
No. Just put it in the closet,
and
shut the
hope it,
door.
put a chair in front of the door,
Yeah, hope your house burns down.
move house.
Yeah, but I mean you have to you in order to like make your way through life in a fulfilled way that's true to yourself,
Yeah,
you have to unbottle it and deal with it.
that's unfortunate.
I know. Therapists are great. Go get one, everyone. So yeah, I focus on people who it's not like they're having like they have major depression or a major traumatic response. It's these people who, they've experienced this traumatic event
Yeah.
and they can move on in a way that they can be healthier.
Yeah.
But they just need, a little extra support dealing with the trauma.
Okay. So, how do you go about researching that?
Yes. Well, one of my mentors, Shirley Moore, she's fantastic. And she took me on as a postdoc.
Hmm.
And I'd already been interested in emotion regulation, but I went with her because I was going to develop an intervention, right, to help
Okay.
people.
Yeah.
And at first, I just went into the research and found something that people already knew was effective. And I was
Hmm.
like, I'm going to do that. And she said to me, that's boring. Come back next month with a better idea.
I'm sorry, I'm not laughing at you. I have just heard that so much in my life as
I know,
well.
right? Like, your work is boring, find something else.
I'm like, yeah, but it's easy. That's easy.
Yeah, exactly. And so then I spent the next year of my life reading and talking to colleagues in a bunch of different disciplines, including psychology. Side note, you need a David for that.
Okay, David.
Okay.
David,
Yes.
Jenny, and Scott now that I'm
Yes.
collecting.
Yep. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And just like talking to people, right? And figuring out like what the struggle is, what's behind the struggle, what's the mechanism of the struggle, and like how can we use knowledge from other disciplines to improve nursing care.
Right. So I'm going to stop you there. So what you tried to do then, just to kind of make sure I've got it in my head, is you're now in your postdoc in order to try and come up with a useful nursing-based intervention. You're chopping and changing and actually forming an interdisciplinary team around you to help do that. Yes?
Yes. Yes.
Cool.
So I sort of just talked to them a lot and figured out which components I thought would be most effective. I focused on work that had been done with women, specifically women middle age and older, right?
Okay.
Because we all have preferences, right? Like there's certain things we you don't have any.
Wait a second. I understand that we all have preferences, but I mean, like, where are you going with this? That was the confusion on my face.
Well, hold on. Okay, so we have preferences, and that includes like how we like to deal with things.
Okay.
So men and women.
I thought you were talking about like the type of people, like preferences towards the type of people you were researching.
No.
That's why I was confused. Because you were like, yeah, women who are this age and we all have preferences. And I'm going, wait. There was a period. I'm with you now. Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, so what kinds of things they lean towards, which types of things they lean away from, so that I can include things in an intervention that they were going to actually try to do.
Right.
Instead of be like, sure, see you later.
Okay. So you gathered all that information, interdisciplinary, plus from your target population itself, that being females. Now, reverse back, you said you'd seen this mainly in men. So what made you then go out on, like, let's be honest, within, not just within cardiovascular, but within research in general, research that equitably includes females, let alone research focused on females, is a little bit like finding hen's teeth.
Yes.
So what made you go, right, I saw this in boys or men on the ward. What made you think, what about girls?
It was more like, where are they?
Okay. Right? Interesting. Like okay, I like that.
If half the population is women, are we just like not sick? Are we magic? Or are we just not present? And it's the second, right? Like
that.
So
say that one more time because that's really powerful.
Oh gosh, well, I already forgot what I said, but are women not sick or are we not present?
Yeah, I like that.
And then when you look at like the outpatient care, it's even worse, right? Like cardiac rehab, we know is like what people should do after a major cardiac event. However, when you go there, look around the room, right? Like who's there?
The very old and the very male.
Yes. I always joke it's because a lot of times men have a partner who is like, you're going to cardiac rehab, right?
Because who are the carers in society?
Well, a lot of times women.
Yeah.
So yeah, absence of women.
Yep.
And so I was like, we got to do something for them, right? Because they're not going to cardiac rehab. I realize that's a problem that needs to be solved as well. But my solution is to help them where they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So to encourage them and support them in the ways we can, rather than, like my old knowledge that we just needed to be like, you're supposed to be there. Why don't you just go? Because I told
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. I told you. Don't be naughty.
Yes, exactly.
And all of the theories out there say if I approach you in the right way and make it relatable, if I educate you, then you'll do what I tell you to. But somehow,
Yeah,
it's
it
not
doesn't
quite that
work.
simple, is it?
No, life is really complicated.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so you found all this out. Have
Mhm.
you developed the intervention? Are you still developing? Where is your research at in this area in this moment in time?
Okay, so I fully developed an intervention in my postdoc and tested it.
Mm-hmm.
And then since then, I've been refining it. I actually have a paper that's not out yet, but does go into like how do you refine an intervention, right? Like you
Mm,
developed it,
okay.
now what, right? Like we all
Yeah.
know that first efforts are not typically amazing.
What?
I know. So some refining is necessary. And I did that through a very like rigorous process. Part of
Okay.
like Kelly's a scientist and not
Yeah.
just a researcher, right? Um, and so that paper will go into the details of that. But I had a rigorous process, I refined it, and then I tested it again.
Oh.
I know.
So
So,
how did you test it?
a randomized control trial.
Okay.
Yep. And so I enrolled, this was actually in men and women because
Okay.
men are at cardiac rehab, and women aren't. So I was recruiting in cardiac rehab. So realistically, I needed to have humans um, respond to the
Yeah.
intervention and see if it worked,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
despite the fact that I had specifically targeted preferences of women.
Yeah.
Um, and so then we figured out that, yeah, it looks like it's going to do something,
Mm-hmm.
specifically impact emotional burdens like
Okay.
stress, anxiety, and depression,
Yeah.
as well as improve physical activity, because that's like
Oh.
what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
It's most of the point of cardiac rehab is to get people actually
Moving.
exercising. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
then take that to now.
Mm-hmm.
I am trying so hard to get the government to realize that this is important and they should give me some money so that I can do a broader test in women.
Right.
And so that's kind of where I am right now. In the meantime, I have plenty of papers that I need to publish, and also continuing to refine what I have.
Yeah.
So it was really cute. We called it the mini trial. We enrolled very specifically women, just a small group,
Yeah.
and gave them the intervention. But after each intervention, would talk to them and collect qualitative data about what they liked, what they didn't like, what they thought
Yeah.
was helpful, not,
Yeah.
so that we can, if everybody hates something, why have it? Right? It's just taking resources. Get rid of it.
Yeah.
And if people really love something and wanted more on that, we
Yeah.
can give them that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so next steps, because I assume you want to know next steps
Yeah.
also.
Yeah.
Next steps are that I'm working on getting some training in the world of AI, which I know lots and lots of
Ooh.
people are doing. I'm not
Yeah.
unique. Um, but trying to find a way that we can allow women to ask questions and get responses that are safe, right? Like we
Ooh.
don't need Dr. Google, right? Dr. Google has
No,
helped
not helpful.
not helped. So I want to have like a limited amount of data that can be pulled to answer the questions so that it's
Interesting.
safe.
Interesting. So using AI as a way to bolster
Mhm.
and support women through the acceptance of the event, the impact of the event on their identity, on their capabilities, on all of those onward effects that, happen after a major cardiac event. But that instead of you specifically in your digital intervention, let's say, saying, here's a leaflet about what
Right.
it's like, how to deal with guilt, let's say.
Yeah.
Guilt at not being able to care, guilt about putting your family through watching you have a cardiac arrest because you can control that. But anyway, it still exists. The guilt is there.
Mhm.
Um, Instead, allowing them to self-direct it, but having like an invisible to them, uh, guardian
Yeah.
as to which information comes through when they ask that question.
I know.
That sounds well cool.
So that would supplement my intervention. It wouldn't like
Yes.
take away what I have.
Yeah.
But we all have, at midnight, like wonder things. And it's not cool to call your nurse at midnight to be like, hey, so I was wondering, what do you think of Tai Chi?
Speaking from personal experience?
Yep. Yep.
Really?
So,
Oh, that's like good for them, but at the same time, I think that speaks to me anyway about the demand and the need that patients have for this sort of thing.
mhm.
Because it's, you know, I wonder, instead of think, I wonder how much all of these educational leaflets
Mhm.
and pamphlets that get created, that are researched and that are informed by people and whatnot, are an attempt to give information to people who seek information, but the mode of giving that information, being a cold piece of paper, prevents it from being as useful as what it could be.
Yeah, it needs to be personalized.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another big thing that I stand by is that everything needs to be remotely accessed. We have so many
Right.
people in the world who do not live near a major medical facility.
Okay. Yep. Yep.
So whatever I provide needs to be something that can be useful somewhere else.
Yeah.
Now I recognize there's challenges with access to technology as well, um, which is how it's delivered,
Mm.
but it's a step in the right direction.
So with your intervention then, is that also part of future plans, is to, like, if the continued research continues to be, this is making a difference and the people it was designed for find it useful and helpful and love it,
Mhm.
um, is that part of your future plans, is to have it be more accessible, i.e. different languages, multiple platforms?
Yes.
Okay.
So one of the brilliances of AI is it could be in any language, right?
Yeah.
Like I can put the content in and it can be delivered in any language,
Mm,
right? Like
yeah.
in the US, a lot of times we're just focused on English and Spanish, right?
Yeah.
But we have populations of all sorts living
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And when you're in the hospital, a lot of times you have to call a translator, right? Um, I had a formative moment when I was working in the hospital where I was working with a blind man who spoke only Spanish. And, we would get translators for sure for major things, but
Yeah.
like when you're just caring for somebody, there's tons of things that are just like day-to-day conversation.
Yeah.
I speak some Spanish, but certainly not enough for all day long,
Yeah.
right? So I would
Yeah.
sit with him at meal times because he was blind. He needed assistance,
Yeah.
and there were so many foods that I didn't know the names of. And so like we would laugh together, but I'd be like, in Spanish, I'd say, "What do you call this?" And then we would put it in his mouth. He would have to tell me. And then
I love that though.
I know, and then I would say, okay, well, do you like that or not? Like,
You're
do you
like
want
force feeding him broccoli, which is like his worst like thing
know.
ever that he hates, and he's like, no, please don't give me that again.
Yeah.
We don't need to play this identify the vegetable game, please.
Yes. But that moment taught me like a big lesson, right? Like even day-to-day things need to be in a language that people
Yeah.
can understand,
Yeah.
or otherwise you're going to feed them broccoli and they hate it.
Yeah. And
So,
I think for me, like not just you, but other people I've spoken to, and even my own journey, I think so much of passion around research comes from those exact formative moments of like the mismatch between the tools I was taught as a nurse, physio, fill in the blank care provider, and the person I'm looking at. They're not on the same level. Sometimes they're not even in the same universe.
right.
And so I think it's why, for me anyway, research or nursing science or whatever you want to call it is so important.
Yeah.
Because I think in general the world believes that you go to the hospital and they know how to they can fix it.
Yeah. We try.
And there's so much left to understand and to explore and whatnot.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
Um, not right now, but I'll get you to send me links of like the top papers you'd like to share that kind of talk about and explain your research in greater detail.
Yep.
So listeners who are out there who've heard it are like, "Ooh, I want to read about this." They can go into the episode description, either on YouTube or a podcasting platform of choice, and I'll have a link and I'll direct them straight to your work. Cool?
Super. Yeah.
Excellent. Right, we are getting close to the end of our hour now, believe it or not. But before we go, I've started asking this more with guests who are nurses or healthcare roles that are a little bit unheard voices in health research. Why? So we found out for you why and how you got into research. Why should other nurses today think about having a career in research?
So for me, it was the scope of influence.
Okay.
So when I was a bedside nurse with the one patient who I'm trying to figure out what food he likes, it was just me and him, right? And it was really, really meaningful and really something that needed to be done. But that was just one person.
Mm,
What happens if I can write policies in the hospital and change care for the hospital system? That's bigger. But that information has to come from somewhere. And that's nursing research, right? Or more broadly, research from lots of disciplines.
yeah.
And so I wanted to be able to move care with more people.
Okay.
Now, the sad news that I found out is it takes like 10 years for knowledge to get anywhere. So that's a little disappointing. So after I die, perhaps somebody will care about what I did.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I care.
Great.
And I think like it's one of the reasons why when we met
Mhm.
almost not quite a year ago, but it's going to be a year soon because where does time disappear to? But anyway, I guess that just means I'm getting old now that time goes fast.
We're always 21.
Yeah, I'm not even that old. Let's be honest. Um, so what was I saying? So like is that scope of influence and talking about policy and things like that and actually having your research make a difference. You say, oh, nobody cares, rah, rah, rah. But I'm like, well, I care because I met you we're here, we're talking about your research. But I think what more you're meaning about that is to have people care is much bigger than just the respect of your colleagues. It's things like, and that's what I'm trying to get round to, is that what you meant by talking to government in order to make your study go bigger? Are you talking about advocacy or were you talking about funding?
Both. So I
Okay.
need the funding first to improve what I'm doing and make it more accessible, more relatable, and have a broader impact on the outcomes that I'm looking at. And then after that, then yes, we need to advocate for change.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I could do both at the same time, but I'm only me. So if anybody out there wants to help me, you just give me a call.
Definitely. Well, and that's what I was going to say as well. Like, we've talked about quite a lot of things from like what it's like to do a PhD and become a neuroscientist in America in the state of Michigan slash Indiana, not Indian. Anyway, moving swiftly on. Um, if anybody has questions, drop them in the comments, specifically on the YouTube video, because it's the easiest way for me, who, similar to Kelly, is just little old me, to find them and make sure that it gets to Kelly so that you get an answer. So if I have a question, drop it there. Cool?
Yeah.
Cool. Right. Last words of wisdom out there for people who are research curious.
You can do it. You just need to be perseverant. I failed high school algebra and they still let me do research. So you can get there.
Yeah, I like
Just,
it. Just keep going. Cool.
I probably shouldn't have said the high school algebra thing, but
You know what? Like, I think I would actually argue the opposite. So I haven't finished it yet. I started reading the book, I don't remember who it's by, Outliers. Malcolm, somebody
yes,
rather? Is it
Gladwell.
Malcolm?
Yes,
Yeah. Anyway,
great book.
like 3 or 4 chapters in. Like you said, great book. And like all of a sudden, looking at and hearing from the work that he did and diving down into these people who, whether it's because they're sporty, whether it's because they're geniuses, whether it's because blah, 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 society sees them as exceptional and society sees them as outliers. You know, he's dive down in a big way into all of the characteristics of large groups of successful individuals. He pulled all the outliers together basically and has formulated ideas around them, and other people did same. They're just ordinary people. And
Yeah,
sometimes they're ordinary people who were born in the beginning of the year, and so that makes them more likely to be sporting heroes because they're more developmentally advanced when the time they start school in September. The
right.
system is stacked for them to do better.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really, to come back to my point, I think it's really important that people like you, who other nurses, just like you have your mentors, who other nurses I have no doubt are looking up to you and are like, wow, the research she does is so cool. You know, it probably does them good to let them know, like, you're just human. So thank
Absolutely.
you for sharing.
Yeah, I am not an outlier. I'm just, in the middle with most of us.
Exactly. Well, and if you've read, I don't know if you've heard of it or not. I love this book. It's like blew my mind a little bit. Normal Sucks.
Oh, no, I haven't read that. That sounds
Oh,
great.
you need to, especially you need to read it. Just so that.
Yep, there she goes. Ah, ta-da!
Normal
I
Sucks
love
by
that.
Jonathan Mooney.
Okay, I'm gonna go get it.
So it's a brilliant book, and what he does is, I haven't read it in a while, so I don't remember the exact details, but when he was a child going to school, he was classified at the time that he was in as special needs. And I use air quotes for people who are listening because that term has changed and we don't really call that people who fit that. But despite that, he went on and was accepted at Brown University, which is one of the Ivy League. He has a PhD, yada yada. And he dives down into this book. It's kind of like a combination between like an easy, accessible thesis and his own personal biography. They kind of merges the two together. And he explores what is normal, how it was defined, the research around it, and what that then meant for him
Mm-hmm.
and his journey through the education system in America.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fascinating. And I think for me, the thing that made me question and will always question now, like you say, oh, I'm in the middle, just like everybody else, is I'm just like, is there such a thing as a middle?
It's a bell curve.
No, is it? That's the question is there actually, is the bell curve as robust as we like to believe it is?
Probably not, because life is complicated.
Exactly. Anyway, better wrap this up because I could chat to you forever. Um, Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for sharing your journey. And I will probably speak to you again soon. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Got to fly across the pond.
Yeah. We got to find a way to
Let's do
make
it.
that happen. We got to find a way to put our brains together and write
Yes.
something cool that we can get somebody to fund. Yeah. Cool. Anyway, thank you very much for being a guest, and
Yeah.
I will speak to you again soon.
Okay. Thanks.
Don't go away. Up next, we have the top 3 takeaways from this week's podcast by Dr. Rosalind Austin. I was fortunate enough to meet Kelly earlier this year at an International Research Week that was held in Linköping, hosted by Tina Jarsma and Anna Stromberg. And yeah, after hearing about the research and the type of research and science that she does, I wanted to invite her on the podcast so that she could share with me, but also all of you, more about her journey into research and importantly, what her research is about. Because I think it's really important to shine a spotlight on researchers out there who are really focusing on those things that are missing in our current clinical research evidence base, and that's what she's focused on. So definitely dive into the description of this podcast and go read her research, and hopefully, like me, you'll find it as inspiring as I did. Right, moving on. Top takeaways for me for this episode is it kept coming up all throughout the podcast is she just kept throwing in lots of different names. And for me, the top takeaway, I think, especially in this moment in time in my postdoc life where I'm trying to build a network, I'm trying to develop that research group around me, is have a fill in the blank in your life. And she used their names, but she was more referring to how not necessarily them, but who they were and the skills that they added that made her research better, made it faster, gave it new perspectives, helped her, really challenge her own skill sets. And so to have multiple people in your research group and your research network who are able to bolster your ideas, turn that vision you have for your figure or your analysis into a reality, who will continually challenge you to grow and change. So yeah, have a fill in the blank in your research life. Second takeaway for me is really interestingly, so lots of our guests have talked about how they saw this thing clinically, and so they started researching about it. And well, yes, that's what Kelly did. She did more than that. So she really observed as a nurse that the men who she was seeing were really struggling to fulfill the things that they were being given as instructions post their cardiac event. when she started looking into it and she started reading about it and started reading the research around it, she noticed that there was something really big and really missing. When you start on your research journey, they always tell you to look for a gap, and or your PhD journey, they tell you to look for a gap and that's what you should focus on. But sometimes that gap might be hard to find. And it's not necessarily hard to find because it's so tiny, but because you don't realize that it's not there until you really look closer. So I know I was guilty of this when I started as a nurse. Like, you make assumptions that the evidence base is strong. You make assumptions that, you know, people who are included in the research are, representative of the people that you're actually taking care of on the ward. And while sometimes that is true, it may not always be true. And I think her really shift of her perspective in her research, in that, yes, she saw it happening in men, but she couldn't find any evidence about women. And so she's now purposely trying to fill that gap around how women deal with and manage their emotions after a major cardiac event. I think just things to that, finding out what's missing and doing research there. So yeah, that was my second takeaway. The last takeaway for this episode is, again, it was kind of subtle in this, and it's something that really hasn't come up before. Is the legacy of research. And I hadn't really thought about it. And Kelly kind of mentioned it in like an offhand and almost sad way, because she's working incredibly hard and is pushing really hard on this frontier in women's health in cardiovascular areas. And she's, struggling to get that research funded, as is loads of people who research things that are in the darker corners of the world. And she mentioned in offhand comment that, because of how long good research and robust research takes, research that will enable policies to change, healthcare systems to change, that takes huge amounts of time. And she's like, nobody cares now, but maybe when I'm dead, they will. And it really struck me. And I challenged her about it in the episode. But the more I thought about it and the more I've reflected about it, is actually maybe it wasn't as sad as what I thought it was. Maybe actually that's a real power to research that we do, is that while, yes, we hope to implement that change quicker, yes, we want to make the distance between research and implementation shorter and shorter and shorter, and we're trying to do that through, involving people who are research effects in the research through patient and public involvement and engagement. And there's a new letter now, but I forget what the new letter is. We try and do it through lots of different tips and techniques, but despite our best intentions, despite the robustness of our research, it might be that it's a legacy and that change won't happen in our lifetime, and that's okay too. So yeah, food for thought, I think. So thank you very much to Kelly for being an amazing guest and for being willing to be on the podcast. Thank you to all of you who are out there listening, who are leaving comments, who are liking posts on social media as well as the video themselves. That all really helps. Not just the algorithm, but it makes me feel like the effort and time that I put into this is really valued. So thank you for all of that feedback. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who's still listening to me at this point. I'm going to wrap it up. As usual, more details in the descriptions. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Give it that thumbs up. And I will see you all again in 3 weeks' time. Thanks so much. Bye.